on a journey to lost civilisations. See ancient artefacts and long-lost ancient scrolls.
The strange writing on this clay brick is known as cuneiform. Now, this script was used...
Take the journey of a lifetime and travel to ancient Babylon and the island of Patmos to discover how ancient mysteries reveal the future. A live seminar series. Don't miss any program.
Ian had an amazing quiz for all of you this evening, but I'd like to ask you a question as well. Last night, when you left, or before you were leaving, I've asked you to do something when you get home. Do you remember my request? What was my request? Look at your toes, right? Did you do it? Put your hand up if you did it. A number of you, that's wonderful. Well, look, there's another challenge. Do it tonight. Remember, we are in the days of the toes. We are right at the end of this timeline. And, there's not much time to go from this. So I hope you all had a wonderful day. I did. I celebrated my wedding anniversary by myself. And I had a wonderful chat with my wife over the phone. And, she is quite thrilled that I have the opportunity to be here. She believes I'm here for a reason, and I believe that you guys are here tonight for a reason as well. And tonight, because you guys have been so amazing, last night I decided that instead of offering one presentation, I decided to give you two presentations tonight. I mean, how good is that, right? So I'm going to have two short presentations. The whole thing is entitled Pompeii and Masada, Global Warnings, and we're going to tackle them separately. And tonight will be part one, Jerusalem and Masada, the coming of the Romans. And this will take us maybe 35 to 40 minutes. We're going to have a short break afterwards. Stretch your legs, grab a cold, maybe hot drink, not a cold one. Grab a hot drink, and then we'll go into a second session that will take us through an amazing journey through Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius, and some of the prophecies that are concerning this year in which we live in 2017. So let's begin our journey with part number one, Jerusalem and Masada. Last night, we learned more about the Greek Empire, and especially Alexander the Great, the one that conquered the Medes and the Persian, and he established the third kingdom. Do you remember the metal in the statue that represented the third kingdom? Bronze, very good, and the Greeks were the ones that had the helmets made out of bronze, the breastplate made out of bronze, the shields, and even the handle of the swords made out of the bronze. It was just amazing. In the year 332 BC, Alexander the Great, he was moving away from Tyre. He had conquered that whole region, and now he was heading towards Jerusalem. And the Israelites knew that Alexander, this great conqueror, is coming towards their city, and the priests within Jerusalem, they left the city and they went ahead of Alexander in order to greet him. And when they got to him, they said, "We knew you were coming." Because in our books, in our scrolls, in the book of the prophet Daniel, that was written 200 years before you came on the scene, we are told that you were going to come. And when Alexander the Great had this prophecy, he changed his mind from destroying the city of Jerusalem. And we're going to learn more about this prophecy and why he changed his mind from destroying the city of Jerusalem. Not only he decided not to destroy it, but he actually went in Jerusalem and he worshipped God in Jerusalem as a result of looking at that prophecy. And tonight we're just going to unpack it a tiny bit. Before we do that, I'd like us to spend some time in Jerusalem. 2,000 years ago, we're looking at the first century, and one of the ancient wonders at the time was this temple known as sanctuary among the people of Israel. And the sanctuary, the temple, was built by King Herod. It was built in the first century. It was a beautiful piece of art. This guy, Herod, not only he was a king, but he was an amazing builder. He wanted to create a name for himself. He's the one known for building the city of Caesarea, and he created this this tunnel, transporting water from a river that was 7 kilometers away from the city. He was really, into all of these things, and he was trying to make life very easy for his people in the town of Caesarea. He also built some fortresses. One is called the Herodian. Right here we've got a couple of rocks left. And the other one is Masada, and we're going to learn a bit more about Masada. This is an amazing, amazing fortress, something like you've never seen before. And Masada plays an important role in the history of Israel as a nation. Before we learn more about Masada, I'd like to mention that this area of the temple that Herod built in the first century was a great place where people were meeting and talking. And this is the place that Jesus spent with his disciples that last week before, as the Bible tells us, before he was crucified. He spent a week there, and he made a number of predictions. And for example, this is one of the verses that tell us about the things that Jesus discussed with his disciples. Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all of these things? Assuredly I say to you, not," how many stones? One. "Not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." We're talking about prophecy, and we're talking about accuracy. Last night we looked at all the psychics and the accuracy of the predictions. And These Times magazine that ran that survey discovered that an average psychic has the ability to predict only 16 out of 100 correct predictions. Whereas as we looked at the Bible, it has 100% accuracy. So Jesus had the prediction that as they looked at the temple, there'll be not one stone left on top of another in the future. And the disciples, as they were looking at this, they asked Jesus the question, "Tell us, when will these things be?" I mean, he told this amazing thing. When is this going to happen? We want to know in advance. And as Jesus heard that question, he made a number of predictions, which we're going to look at. He made a prediction regarding the city of Jerusalem, and then he made a prediction regarding the temple, and then he made the third prediction regarding the Jewish nation. And we're going to go through 5 points very quickly, and you're going to see how all of these things were fulfilled in the first century. So what we're doing now, this first session before our break, is this. We're going to look at these predictions that were made by Jesus Christ, were fulfilled, and then we're going to look at some predictions that were made for our days today in this century, 2017, and we're going to see how all of these are actually impacting our lives, because the whole purpose of this presentation, ancient mysteries reveal the future. And that's why you're here tonight. Number one, Jesus said Jerusalem will be surrounded by an embankment wall, and it will be destroyed. So he was talking to his disciples and said, look, this city, that you're looking at this very moment, this is going to be surrounded by a wall. Someone is going to create a wall around it. Not only that, someone is going to destroy it. This is the verse. Now, as they drew near, he saw the city and wept over it. He wept because he knew what was going to happen in the future, saying, these days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground. Not a pretty prediction, but it was a reality. Number two, Jesus also said that the temple will be totally destroyed, and there are some specific elements that are presented in this prediction. And look at this verse. It says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you are not willing. See, your house," because the temple was called the house of God or the house of prayer. That's why it's called here. "Your house is left to you desolate." And then he says, "Not one stone here will be left on another." So what Jesus is saying, you've got this amazing building that you look at and you're surprised and say, wow, this is a wonder. But it says not only it will be destroyed, but it says, you see these rocks as they're stuck up? All of them are going to be completely removed. Completely removed. And that specification is very important for the accuracy of the prophecy. This is one of the stones that are part of the whole thing of the temple. And just to give an understanding of the size, we've got 20 meters in length, 2 meters in height, and the width is 3 meters. And Jesus says, it's not going to be two on top of each other. Everything is going to be completely removed and destroyed and thrown away. Number 3, it says the Jews are going to fall by the sword. There will be great distress in the land, and wrath against these people. They will fall by the sword. I'd like you to pick up and highlight, emphasize the elements, these things that are meant to stand out and be specific. Number 4, this is the second last one. The Jews to be scattered among the nation. And this was an amazing prediction made 2,000 years ago. And we're going to see how this very thing is being fulfilled in the 21st century and where the Jews are actually living today. He says they will fall by the sword, as we just mentioned previously, and they will be taken as prisoners. Where? To all the nations. To all the nations. They will be all over the show. And number 5, Gentiles, because if the Jews are taken away prisoner to all the nations, guess what happens? Gentiles will now inhabit Jerusalem. Gentiles will now inhabit Jerusalem, and it says, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So these are the 5 predictions that Jesus made on that day. He mentioned them to his disciples. They were overlooking the Temple Mount, and the question is, were they fulfilled? And we're going to see what history tells us, because we said we're going to look at history and at the science of archaeology to see if we've got a reliable source that we can trust when it comes to predicting the future. As we saw last night, it's not very easy to predict the future. We looked at 2012, 2000. People make a number of predictions. They don't take place. So we want a source that is reliable and it has a really good track record. So were they fulfilled? In the year 66 AD, which was 35 years after Jesus made the prediction, this fellow by the name of Gessius Florus, he decided to take a tax from the temple money. And when the Jews heard that, they decided to revolt, and they killed all the Roman soldiers that were stationed in Jerusalem at that stage. And of course, Rome wasn't too happy about. Now, those that were part of the revolt, they actually went to this this is actually Masada, this fortress on top of this hill mountain, and the fortress was actually built here. Masada, we're going to look at some other pictures later on. And there were some soldiers stationed over there, and those that were part of the Jewish revolt killed the soldiers, and they took occupation of this fortress, Masada. Of course, Rome wasn't indifferent to this act. Actually, this is Herod's fortress, Masada. This is what's left of it from 2,000 years ago. And what's fascinating, it had 3 levels. The top one, this was the second, and the bottom one. It was like pretty much impossible to get to it. And that was overlooking the Dead Sea. So this is on the side. One level was here. Second, you can see a bit of a road. And the third one here, and looking from the bottom level out into the Dead Sea. So Rome decided to send Cestius Gallus with 30,000 soldiers, Roman soldiers, to go and actually surround Jerusalem. And this is the interesting thing. This guy took his soldiers, went to Jerusalem, surrounded the city. Surrounded the city. Now at this time, it's important to remember the prediction that Jesus made. The Christ's warning and the instruction. He said, when you shall see Jerusalem, what? Surrounded by the armies, they know that desolation is near. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the country regions go into it. So the question, and actually goes on one more, flee to the mountains and let them, so how shall you flee a city when it's surrounded? Because we say this guy was sent with 30,000 soldiers, surrounded the whole city, and then you remember, when the city is going to be surrounded, I need to flee, I need to run, I need to go away to the mountains. How am I going to do it? This is the fascinating thing. For some unknown reason, Cestius Gallus, after some time of surrounding the city, decided to withdraw, and he went away. He disappeared. No one knows the reason. There's nothing recorded of why he actually took his troops and went away from Jerusalem. He was there in position to attack and destroy Jerusalem, and for some unknown reason, he called his soldiers and said, "We're going out of here." That's quite something. And look what happens next. Christians that heard the words of Jesus, the prediction, 35 years before, they said, "This is our chance." So they went to this place, Pella, in Jordan, and they sought refuge there. But sadly, not everyone followed them, only those who truly believed the prediction that was made by Jesus Christ. So what happens next? The Roman Empire sent Vespasian with his army to go and actually destroy Jerusalem. But this guy, he was quite a guy. Because as he was heading towards Jerusalem, he was attacking all the towns and villages. But his purpose, and this is extremely interesting in his technique, as he was attacking these villages and towns, he was not killing the people. He was allowing them to escape only in one single direction, and that was towards Jerusalem. He wanted everyone to be in Jerusalem and get rid of them in one city with one blow. So he was allowing them to escape in one direction. The thing is, while he was doing all this work, Emperor Nero died. Vespasian was called to Rome to be enthroned as the new emperor of the Roman Empire. So he couldn't actually finish his mission. And here we come to his son, Titus, that in a way achieved what his dad was trying to do. And Titus is the one that besieged Jerusalem in the year 70 AD. And what he did was, first of all, he surrounded the city and he decided to starve the Jews. He basically encamped outside, and this is what he did. He built a wall around Jerusalem, just as Jesus predicted. And this wall stopped anyone from going in, and it stopped anyone from coming out. And during that time, during this siege, Josephus, or Jewish historians, recorded that 1 million Jews perished in that siege. And these people perished because they did not listen to the prediction that was made before 30-something years by Jesus Christ. Sadly, as we look in history, it seems that the Jewish nation had its share of suffering. Some of you might be very familiar with the things that took place in Auschwitz, that concentration camp during the Second World War, where more than 1 million Jews actually, died. I didn't get a chance to visit that, not that I'm really keen to do it, but I had the opportunity to visit another concentration camp in Germany, Dachau concentration camp. And I tell you what, the feelings that I experienced as I was walking in that concentration camp, that now is more like a museum and a bit of a memorial, looking at all the pictures and the way in which they were treated, seeing the ovens where they were burnt and made into ashes. And actually, as a group, we entered into the room where they were planning to gas them to death. I tell you what, I was actually terrified to be in that room. I was saying, is this going to happen now? I mean, it sounds silly, right? But when you think of the history and of the thousands of people that have passed away, and you think of this suffering. By the way, we're going to deal with the issue of suffering one night in the future. Why is there so much suffering? Why do we have to put up with so much pain and death? So don't miss out on any of this presentation. But, history tells us that, Jews, tragically, they suffered quite a lot. And as Titus was, surrounding this city, Jerusalem, some people died, but there was one last group that, in a way, they remained here within the temple court. And interesting, this fortress was built by the Romans, and you've got these upper windows in order to look to see what's happening in the court, because they knew if there's going to be a revolt, is there going to be something, a plan, it's going to take place in that temple court. So they wanted to peek and see what's happening. Are we keeping these guys under control or not? It appears that the Jews have always been a bit of a thorn in the flesh for the Roman Empire. One of the commands that Titus mentioned to his soldier was, as you go into Jerusalem and you kill and you destroy, make sure you don't destroy the temple. Make sure you don't destroy this house, because it's a beautiful thing. We're going to use it in the future. It's an amazing work of art. But sadly, as the soldiers were fighting, there was fire thrown into the temple. And the things within the temple started to burn. And what's interesting, the gold and the silver started to melt. And it was going through the cracks between the stones. Now, this is very important, because the prediction was the stones will be removed. And today, archaeologists are discovering all the stones that were thrown by the Roman soldiers in order to take the gold and the silver. By the way, this is the ground level nowadays. Everything here was dug up by archaeologists. And these were the stones that were thrown from above where the temple used to be. But not anymore, because today, not one stone left on one another. What you have there, it's a memorial for the Islam faith, where they believe Muhammad ascended to heaven, and behind you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but there's no temple, there's no stone left on another. If you get to visit Rome, there's a Arch of Titus in Rome, and underneath that arch you see how soldiers of Titus actually carried the 7-branch candlestick from in the temple and took it away from Jerusalem to Rome. They carried everything. And today, there is no Jewish temple, just as Jesus predicted 2,000 years ago, before it happened. And we're talking about 100% accuracy. So what about Masada? During this siege, there were 900 zealots together with their family that took refuge in this fortress. Now, zealots were the ones that were really keen to kill all the Roman soldiers. You know, they were fighters. They had this thirst for blood to get rid of the soldiers, the Roman soldiers. So they sought refuge here in Masada. And the Romans actually encamped around that whole mountain. Even today, you can see the camps that 2,000 years ago the Roman Empire used in order to find a technique to take over this fortress. They actually built a wall around that mountain in order to make sure that no one goes out, no one goes towards the fortress, and no one comes out of the fortress. And they built a siege ramp in order to carry on their equipment. And these were the siege missiles they were, throwing towards the fortress. And eventually, one day, they made a hole into the fortress wall. And that was the break that they used in order to go into the city. But it's interesting, when that happened, there was a meeting in one of the synagogues in that fortress. And the leader, Eliezer ben Yair, he was the zealot commander. He called all the leaders and he said, tomorrow, the Roman soldiers are going to invade our fortress. And they're going to rape your wife, abuse your children. They're going to do this, and this to us. So how about we commit suicide tonight? He had such an inspiring message to all of the zealots that all the men were determined to go back, kill their wives and children. And then 10 zealots were appointed to do all the killing of those that have killed their wives, and then for them to commit suicides. As a matter of fact, archaeologists have found the lots of the 10 names that were chosen to live the last and do the last killing right there in that fortress in Masada. We don't know how, but there were 2 women and 5 children that lived that massacre. And they lived to tell the story. And what's fascinating, in that morning, when the Roman soldiers went, instead of finding resistance, they found silence and death everywhere. They were just, I guess, surprised by what was happening there. But that was the end of the resistance that took place in Masada. In the year 135, the Roman Emperor Hadrian drove the Jews from Jerusalem. Remember, one of the prediction was that the Jews are going to be scattered to all the nations. And Jews are scattered around the world today. As a matter of fact, there are more Jews living in New York, in London, and Moscow than in Jerusalem. So what's happening in Jerusalem? You've got all the Gentiles that are actually inhabiting Jerusalem nowadays. So you've got all of these prophecies being fulfilled 100%. There is no doubt, or maybe, and there is no, maybe these things, there's no vagacy about it. It's clear and precise. Palestinian Arabs control the Temple Mount. They don't have a temple anymore. And Christ's predictions were exactly fulfilled, as he said. But you know what's fascinating? As Jesus was making these predictions, in a way he was repeating what Daniel, the prophet, 500 years in advance, has already stated. Jesus himself actually makes reference to the book of Daniel when he says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And these are the ones that, left Jerusalem and went to Pella in Jordan, and they survived the attack. And, the other 1 million Jews, they stayed back, and sadly they all died, either of hunger or the attack, the sword. Just to remind you, the book of Daniel was one of the scrolls that was found in the Dead Sea area, Qumran, that dates back to 100 to 200 BC. And within that book, there is a prophecy that stopped Alexander the Great from his conquest, but at the same time predicted the things that the Roman Empire was going to do. So I'd like to take you through what Daniel in chapter 8 describes as the great war between what? Just like two animals that sometimes you have them on a farm, right? But here he says there's a great war, because what Daniel is saying, these animals, they're not just animals, they're actually representing powers. So you have a war, a great war between a ram and a goat. And the interesting thing about, not the interesting, the amazing thing about the Bible is that you don't have to figure out the interpretation like, what is this ram? What is this goat? The Bible interprets itself. You don't have to guess it. It gives you everything in order to have the certainty that it is a book that is divine. So who do the ram and goat represent? As I said, Daniel actually tells us clearly. 8:20 says, "The ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia," as we saw in the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had last night. It was interesting because Media and Persia was represented by silver, the chest with the arms. And how many arms do we have? 2 arms, right, like the Medes and the Persian to some extent. And here you have a ram with 2 horns. So the ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire, and then you have the goat, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes it's the first king. So the ram, again, prophecy is so specific, my friends. We're not talking about guessing here. It's specific. Ram, 2 horns, the Medes and the Persians. Greek, just 1 horn, and it represents its king. Who was the first king of the Greek Empire? Alexander the Great. So the goat is Greece. Look what it says. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. And this brings us to Alexander the Great. As he was arriving as he was moving away from Tyre because he had conquered that area, he was going to Jerusalem. This priest came before him and said, we knew that you're coming. Look, in the scroll of our prophet Daniel, we are told of your victory. And look exactly what the Bible says. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up. And I tell you, I might be the only one here, but I get really excited when you see Bible being so specific. I talked about psychics last night. And they're getting maybe 16 correct predictions out of 100. But here we're talking about 100% accuracy to every single detail. And it says, this Greek Empire had 1 king. When this king goes, you've got 4 notable ones coming up towards the 4 winds of heaven. And as for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. You know what that prophecy tells us? That Alexander the Great died in Babylon, and when he died, in a way, his empire died. Because there was no other king, in a way, that replaced him. History tells us that Alexander the Great had 4 generals. In year 301 BC, they just had a fight, and no one actually agreed who was going to lead, so the whole empire was divided in 4, just like the prophecy predicted at least 200 years in advance. It says 4 notable horns came out from towards the 4 winds of heaven, and out of one of them, meaning out of the 4 winds, one of the 4 points of the compass came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Let's do a bit of an exercise. Last night we looked at that statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt about. And we said the head was made out of gold, and it represented the first kingdom, which was Babylon. Very good. You've got the hands and the chest made of silver, representing Medo-Persia. You've got the thighs made of bronze, representing Greece. You've got the legs made of iron, and they represent Rome. So if we dealt with Medo-Persia and Greece, that means this little horn that comes represents Rome. It represents Rome and the things they did to the Jewish nation and to Jerusalem and to the temple. And the way the predictions that Daniel mentions are just amazing. He says, this little horn, exceedingly great towards south, and this is the area that the Roman Empire actually conquered, Egypt. And then he said, went east, Mesopotamia, went to Israel. Did they actually conquer Israel? Of course they did. It was General Pompeii that conquered Israel in 63 BC. It was greater than Greece, of course. They had a greater territory. And it stand against Jesus Christ. Some of you might be very familiar with the story that it was actually the Roman soldiers that had crucified Jesus Christ. Things that were predicted more than 500 years before they were fulfilled. Number 6, cast down the sanctuary. Daniel was prophesying that this power is going to cast down the sanctuary. And we've learned that the temple was destroyed by Titus and his soldiers in year 70 AD. And it also says took away the daily temple services. Well, if the temple was destroyed, guess what? There were no more sacrifices. There was no place where to bring the sacrifices anymore. And of course, that was fulfilled as well. And last one that I'd like to mention this evening is this power actually trampled on God's people. In other words, trampled on those that accepted that faith in Jesus, in God. And history tells us about Christians that have died in the Colosseum or Circus Maximus in Rome. And you've got these pictures that are depicting the torture through which Christians went through because of their faith in God. And that was prophesied. Romans had a quite interesting way of keeping themselves entertained. What shall we do today? Well, let's burn some Christians. That'll be fun. So they would cover them with tar, as we have here, and set them alive. Or sometimes they would do that at night so they can have light in the city. No cost for electricity. They would feed them to the lion, and that was for them a way to laugh and enjoy a good life and say, these guys are not worth living. Sadly, these things happened, but at the same time, they were predicted 500 years in advance, which brings me back to this amazing book. Is there a source that we can trust that is historically accurate and has a great track record? This is the book. As we have seen last night and as we are seeing tonight, Christ's predictions were fulfilled. And this is the point that I want to finish my first presentation tonight. Jesus Christ made some predictions in the first century around year 30. Within 30 years, his predictions about Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jews started to be fulfilled. And today we still see their fulfillment. But here's the thing. Jesus also made some predictions concerning our time. And the amazing thing is, the prediction he made about the past, predictions were fulfilled, which tells me if he made some predictions about the future, they are going to be fulfilled as well, and we need to know them. We need to know them. So this will be our second presentation tonight, Pompeii. How near is the end? Remember last night I've asked you to look at your toes? We're going to see that we're actually on our tippy toes. Look, tonight we're going to Pompeii. How near is the end? To begin with, I'm going to share some pictures of this place, Pompeii. These are some of the streets that were dug up by archaeologists. And on these very streets, on these very rocks, nearly 2,000 years ago, people have walked and has been preserved since then because of that explosion that took place. People in Pompeii really knew how to live their lives as in big style. They had actually large homes. Not only that, but I want you to get this thought in your minds. 2,000 years ago, some of the houses had piped water to their house. I mean, you're looking now in the 21st century, around the globe, you still have houses with no piped water. But these guys had it 2,000 years ago. The technology was quite advanced for their time. This was the forum, or what we call today the marketplace, or even better, the CBD, where the business transactions were taking place. They were, crossing paths, and this was their place for market. The wool merchants, people would come here and buy wool products, and then they would go home and, create the clothing items. The bakery was quite a fascinating place because everything's been preserved, and you can still see how they were doing all of these things 2,000 years ago. And yes, 2,000 years ago they had fast food shops. We don't know what was their name, definitely not Mecca's or KFC, but they had fast food. They were keeping things in all of these places, and people would quickly come, grab something from each, and move on with their activities. People in Pompeii, they loved to maintain themselves entertained. They went to theater on a regular basis, and this was a culture in a way created by the Greeks, and it is from this culture of theater and watching plays and watching actors is the word that we have today in English, hypocrite. Have you ever used this word when you're talking about someone? He's such a hypocrite, or she's such a hypocrite. The word actually comes from this Greek culture, where hypocrite referred to the actor that was holding a mask over his face, pretending to be someone else, because he was an actor. So, that is the background of the word that we're using today, hypocrite. You're pretending to be someone that you're not. And of course, those that had a thirst for blood would go to the sports arena, where they would watch the gladiators fight to death. That was a reality show for them. They wanted to see how one of the guys get their neck cut off, or they get pierced with a spear or something. So it was like real life events. And in the evening, before you would go home, probably you would stop at the bathhouse. You be in a warm water, and you just relax. Your muscles would feel great after a long day, and you would go home ready for a good night's sleep. Or others would go to a brothel. It is very fascinating. I'm not sure why, but actually the brothels have been one of the best preserved places in Pompeii. I mean, maybe was the first one that was dug up. And some of the things you see there wasn't appropriate for me to actually put it on the screen, because the drawings from on the walls in these brothels are still preserved to this day. And there was an inscription found in Pompeii with these words, Sodom and Gomorrah, which led historians and the archaeologists believed that there were some Jews that lived in Pompeii, because this comes from the Bible in the book of Genesis, where these represent two cities that were destroyed and experienced divine judgment. But they say what's happening in Pompeii definitely resembles what took place in Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, with all of this maybe misery and lifestyle they were having, they needed a bit of worship. So they had temples, but their worship and temples did not really affect their life. It was more to appease their conscience a bit, but wasn't going to spoil their fun. It was quite an interesting system of worship, because at that stage they were practicing what you call temple prostitutes. So basically, if the husband would wake up one morning and say to his wife, "Darling, I'm going to worship today at the temple," basically what he meant was this: "I'm going to the temple and sleep with a prostitute. And that will bring pleasure to the God that we think exists." They have created a God according to their own image and according to their own pleasure. And it was quite an interesting scene. And they had both male and female prostitutes. But all is in the background, so he's Pompeii, all is in the background was this silent monster and giant, Mount Vesuvius. In 62 AD, we have records that Mount Vesuvius actually rumbled and created an earthquake, that some of the houses and buildings were actually destroyed. They collapsed. But you know what? People rebuilt them and they moved on with life as if nothing happened. And then in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius rumbled again. There was an earthquake. People were scared for a minute, but life went on as nothing happened. And then the fatal day came, August the 24th, 79 AD, when Mount Vesuvius not only rumbled, but he actually exploded. And for 3 days, it created chaos over this whole region, and Pompeii was completely covered. People left it until it was too late. They failed to heed the warning signs. They had the warning signs in 62, and then at the beginning of 79, they said, this is one of the things that's going to move on. We're going to live as if nothing is happening. They failed to heed the warning signs. Last session, we looked at some of the predictions that Jesus made and how they were so accurately fulfilled in that first century and also throughout time until today. Now we're going to look at some amazing prophecies that Jesus made concerning our time. So we looked at these ones, and these were all fulfilled. But then the disciples asked this powerful question that really talks about our time. Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? Because for them, they knew that Jesus returning and the end of the world is one event. It was one event. And Jesus started to list a number of events that are going to take place right before He comes. And as we look at these events, you are going to understand that we find ourselves on the knife edge of eternity. The statue tells us that we are in the time of the toes. And these signs are actually telling us that we are on the knife edge of eternity. He mentioned a number of signs, and we're going to put them in certain groups. We're going to begin with signs in the natural world because we're very familiar with the things that are happening in our world. And the first one will be earthquake. And I would imagine New Zealand knows what an earthquake is all about. Jesus made this prediction 2,000 years ago, and there will be earthquakes in various places. Just to mention a number of them in recent history that have really, shaken the whole world, and people have heard about. You've got the Haiti one, sadly the one that this country has experienced in the South Island, the Christchurch. You've got the ones in Japan and Nepal. So it's not just a matter of that you're having an earthquake and some buildings collapse. You've got numerous lives perishing. You've got people that are torn apart. How do you cope with this pain? How do you cope with this terror? When is this earthquake going to strike next? Earthquakes are not just a matter of destruction of buildings. It's the terror and the pain that they bring into our lives. What's interesting to discover is that earthquakes are actually increasing. It's not like they're keeping a momentum, or they're increasing. Now look at the statistics. In the first 10 years of the 20th century, so looking from 1901 to 1911, or 1910 I should say, there were 18 recorded quakes over 6 on the Richter scale. Just keep that number, put it in the back of your mind. 18 quakes over 6 on the Richter scale. That was at the beginning of the 20th century. In the last 10 years of the 20th century, there were 42 earthquakes recorded over 6 on the Richter scale. So you've got 18 at the beginning, now you've got 42. So that is the 20th century. How about the 21st? How do we find ourselves in that situation? Well, in the first 10 years of the 21st century, you have 217 earthquakes over 7, my friends. They sort of say 6 is too low. We need to start from those above 7 on the Richter scale. And all of these things are, sounding in our ear, and they should take us back to the prediction of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago that said, there will be earthquakes. And this will tell us as they increase, they get us right on the edge of eternity. Jesus also mentioned about famines, and this is such a sad reality that it really troubles my heart. Jesus said, and there will be famines in this world. Statistics tell us that 24,000 children or people die daily from hunger. And sometimes I'm thinking of the world that we're living in, what we call a Western world, with breakfast, lunch, dinner, sometimes morning tea, afternoon tea, and snacks. And you've got people around the world, 24,000 that die daily. And that is 1 every 3.6 seconds. Again, brings me back to the idea, why is there so much pain? What are we doing about this? We're going to cover this topic of suffering one other evening. 925 million go to bed hungry every night. It's a sad reality, but at the same time, this should tell us that the things that Jesus had predicted are being fulfilled before our eyes. So what about the tsunamis and the cyclones and the floods that this world is experiencing? Well, it's no surprise that actually Jesus predicted them. He says, and there will be distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves, look at that word, roaring. We are familiar with the Boxing Day tsunami in Asia that killed more than 260,000 people just in one hit. And you never know when the next tsunami is going to come. Somewhere, New Zealand has some exposure. You've got all the other countries and the islands. There's always a fear, and the Bible tells us that we should be expecting these things to take place. Nations are anxious about such terrifying events because you cannot control them. Jesus predicted them with 100% accuracy. So this was basically just a short summary of the signs in the natural world that Jesus predicted them 2,000 years ago. We're moving on to the second one, signs in the political world. As I said, Jesus is very specific. He doesn't say something broad. It's like he goes right to the point of the matter. And talking about the political world, he says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of war. Today, we are experiencing 30 wars every year. We may not have one in Australia or in New Zealand, but guess what? They're happening around the world. And you've got people dying and suffering. There's another aspect of war. $100 million are spent on war every hour. Every hour. Now look at the statistic. 80 times more money are spent on war than is needed to provide water and sanitation for the whole world. 80 times more than what's needed to make everyone or to help everyone live in a comfortable way. And we just love fighting with one another as human beings. At this stage, we've got around 27,000 nuclear bombs in stock. It's more than enough just to take this planet apart and basically disappear from the solar system. More than enough, and people are afraid, who's going to be the first one to push that button and eliminate one of the countries. So there's that international global conflict, because Jesus made this statement, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. He doesn't say just about civil war or just within a nation. There will be between countries and between nations, between kingdoms. The nations were angry, and we see the results of the nations being angry. You know, in the last century, we just said 180 million died as a result of war. People that could have, move on with their lives, but they perished as a result of the war. And of course, we've got the fear of the nuclear conflict, and the latest, the fear that the terrorists might get their hands on a nuclear bomb. Because they don't care if they die together with the bomb. They have achieved their purpose. So people live with that anxiety in their heart. So this was our second one, signs, political world. This moves us to our third one, signs in the social world. And this has got to be an interesting one, and I might be stepping on someone's toes now, but the life we're living may not be the ideal one. Because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. There's another passage in the Bible that describes basically the life of people at the end of time. And this is what it says. Know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves. Okay? So we're talking about selfishness. Lovers of themselves. They'll be lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers. They'll be disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. It is a sad description of the society in which we are living today. It is a very violent society with the moral standards being very, very lowered. Not really caring about the things that are happening. And just to help you understand that, I'm not sharing with you a fairy tale or it's just my personal opinion. I would like you to look at a parallel. The school problems that teachers experienced in the 1940s, right? Let's look at the problems. I mean, these were the things that really traumatized the teachers in 1940. Talking in class. That was a major problem. Second one, chewing gum. That was quite trendy back then, right? Doing the naughty thing. Making noise. Shouldn't be making any noise. Running in hall. Cutting in line. I mean, that's outrageous, isn't it? No uniform? I mean, are you kidding me? Who do you think you are? With no uniform at school today. These were the things that principal would call someone, student in his office or her office, and they would deal with this problem. And of course, littering. You throwing a piece of paper in the classroom, that was considered as major disobedience. So that was 1940s, 60, 70 years ago, right? Let's consider some of the problems in 2000s. Drug use, alcohol abuse, pregnancy, suicide, rape, robbery, assault. Is it just me? Or it looks like the world has lost the plot? The difference of the problems that school was experiencing 60 years ago and what's happening today, it's just, outrageous. And it takes the time just to pause and think that this world is heading in the wrong direction. I'm going to share with you a statistic that is more to do with Australia. And I just hope, I do not know, but I just hope that the situation in New Zealand is much, much better. 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before age 18. And that really breaks my heart, especially as a parent, right? You've got 1 in 6 boys. So tonight, before you go home, if you see 6 children, just think that because of statistics, 1 will experience this traumatic thing. I'm not saying that kids from here will experience, but these are the statistics. It's just heartbreaking of where this world is actually heading. So these were, in a way, a summary of the signs in the social world. So we dealt with the natural signs in the natural world, political world or environment, in the social world, and Jesus also talks about signs in the religious world. He says, beware of false prophets you will know them by their fruits. You will know them by their fruits. The world has experienced a number of cults. Jim Jones cult that has led a large group of people to commit suicide together, and they were in a way worshiping him. David Koresh, Waco, cult from Texas, America, Jewish Messiah. There's actually a fellow in Brisbane at the moment in Australia. He claims to be Jesus Christ, and he's got a group of followers that follow him. And he divorced his wife, and he met another lady, and he married her. And actually, he said to her, "You are Mary Magdalene from 2,000 years ago." So, he's telling all of these stories, and people believe. So you've got all this crazy, wacko stuff happening, and Jesus actually predicted that as we get close to the end of time, these things are actually going to increase. And what's an interesting one, as we get closer to the end of time, there will be disbelief in creation by God. Peter, who was a follower of Jesus, a friend of Jesus, said, knowing this first, that in the last days they will willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old. Basically, saying people will forget that this world was actually created by God. If you were to think that 2,000 years ago, I'm not talking about, people having a right understanding, but regardless of where you are coming from, you believe there is a superpower that brought this planet together. There was something bigger, higher than you. But now we're living in an age of, in a way, disbelief, where this prophecy is actually being fulfilled before our eyes. And one of the ones that I really enjoy, Jesus said, as we come closer to the end of time, the gospel will be proclaimed to every single nation around the world. And he says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. In a way, this will really bring the group to the end of the journey. This will be the climax of the whole thing. The gospel, the good news will be proclaimed, will give people certainty, assurance, identity, hope, meaning, purpose. The spread of the gospel. Ancient mysteries reveal the future. The purpose of this is to bring hope and understanding about the times we're living and what's coming in the future. The Time magazine had this incredible article in which they were stating adherents to that faith, Christianity, have more than tripled all across Asia since 1970, jumping from just over 100 million to over 350 million today. They're actually saying, there's something happening, but Christianity is really spreading like wildfire, not just in one particular area of the globe, but everywhere around the globe. And you've got people now in South America, Philippines, and Africa. And the reason why I'm sharing this is the prediction that Jesus made 2,000 years ago is being fulfilled before our eyes. And India, considered quite a big Hindu country, is one of the fastest growing in terms of Christianity. People embracing the faith. As a matter of fact, I was in India in the month of December 2016, and I just had an amazing experience in just connecting with the people there and sharing a truth that is liberating, leaving an old life behind and embracing hope and purpose for the future, understanding that there is a plan for their lives and there is something that is secure. So the global warnings that Jesus was talking about 2,000 years ago are these. There were global warnings in the natural world, political world, social world, and of course the religious world. And question is, what do they all mean? We see them fulfilled. We have the evidence. What is the significance for that? What is the significance? Jesus left these powerful words. When you see all of these things, know that Christ's return is near at the doors. My friends, I feel compelled just to remind you once again, as we looked last night at the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had 2,500 years ago. And that dream tells us with amazing accuracy that we're finding ourselves in the days of the toes, right at the end. And we're looking at these predictions that were made 2,000 years ago, and they tell us again we're finding ourselves on the knife edge of eternity. We know that we are right at the end. Jesus is about to return. So what should be our reaction as we know these things? Should we start trembling and be filled with fear, anxiety. Quite the opposite. The Bible tells us, now when these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your head, because your redemption draws near. What Jesus was saying is this: as you see all of this happening, be filled with hope, because God's empire is about to take over. Why should we be excited about this empire? Why should we be looking forward to it? Why? Well, as we mentioned last night, this will be an empire with no tears. And there will be no more pain, and there will be no more sorrow. And, of course, there will be no more death. Because we have experienced all of this for too long. And all of these things have really destroyed our health and our happiness and our existence here on earth. And in a way, God is saying, you weren't made to experience this. That's why we find it so hard to cope with them. We weren't made for that. But the kingdom that God is preparing and the kingdom that is about to be established will have none of this. No tears, no pain, no sorrow, and no death. Remember the story? Pompeii, August 24, 79 AD. That famous morning, people woke up, and for them it was just another day. It was in a way business as usual in the forum or in the marketplace. That morning people woke up and they went to the market, or maybe they went to the psychics in order to discover what's going to happen in the future, not knowing that was going to be the last day. I believe that many people have tried to leave Pompeii and exit the town through these very gates. But sadly, they left it until it was too late. They ignored the signs that had received in the previous years. People might have went to the bakery to buy their bread for in the morning. Actually, we've got a bread from 2,000 years ago that was discovered by archaeologists. But sadly, they left it until it was too late. Maybe they went to their temples to find refuge from the destruction that was about to come upon them. But sadly, there was no help for them in the temples they were meeting. Pompeii failed. People in Pompeii, they failed to heed the warning signs. The reason why I share this story with you is because tonight wasn't really about them. Tonight is about you and me. It's about us. We have seen all of these things being predicted and fulfilled. Question for you to think about tonight as you go home. Are we listening? Are we really hearing what's happening around? Do we take notice? Do we understand the time in which we're living? Or do we wake up and we say business as usual? Just another day, not knowing that the end could be very soon. So what should we do? Bible tells us, watch yourselves, in case your hearts be weighed down with partying and drunkenness and the cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. God wants us to be sober and to have an understanding of what's happening around us so that we can actually be part of this last empire. How can we be part of this? As I mentioned to you last night, I was 20 years of age when I moved from Romania to Australia. And as I came to Australia, things started to be a bit different because I left my parents and that side of family back in Romania. In a way, I left my culture, and all of a sudden I was exposed to new culture, a new language, a variety of faiths and beliefs, and in a way my world was shaken. And I got to a point, even though I was raised in a Christian family, I got to a point where I was ready to throw in the towel and chuck everything away. And I started to wonder, is anybody out there? Does it really matter? Does this book contain the guidance and the truth that I need? At the age of 20, I experienced one of the most, I guess, challenging, but at the same time, exciting times of my life, because I had the opportunity to revisit the things that I embrace. And, there's a lot of rubbish on the internet, and there's a lot of truth as well. And for some time, I took a lot of rubbish in. And I was ready to take it as authority. But after a while, after you feed yourself on rubbish, guess what? You're not satisfied, you're not fulfilled. You believe a lot of lies that there's no certainty for them. And I started to ask myself, is there a source of truth? And then when you look at the discoveries that the archaeologists have made and that really back up this amazing and life-changing book, and you say, well, I can't prove it wrong. And then when you look at all the facts that the Bible is actually historically accurate, it names all the people that historians and scholars have challenged for centuries, and then it's proved to stand true. And then the thing that for me was just life-changing, it was, this is the point, I can do no other, was the prophecies concerning ancient civilization. I mean, this is too much. There's no other book in the world that has the accuracy of prophecy like this book. And at the age of 20, this was the book that I went away from and I went back to, because I couldn't find any other one. And it was just a good time, because I was removed from my comfortable environment, and it was just great for research. And that is something that we are all encouraged to do. And the Bible is dependable. It has amazing prophecies with a proven track record. And as a result of that, the Bible prophecy brought peace, hope, purpose to my life. And I'm here today in 2017 before you as a result of that. And my question to all of you tonight is, how many of you tonight would like to experience the same peace and hope and purpose in life that God is willing to give you by choosing to trust in Him? If you're willing to experience that peace and hope, would you care to actually raise your hand and say, I want to experience that peace? Those that want to experience the peace and the hope and the purpose. I want to have the idea where I'm going, where I'm coming from. God is the one that is inviting us, and He wants us to really, embrace these things and give Him a chance. Thank you for those that, put your hand up. And I hope that tonight you'll go home asking yourself, am I listening to the signs that are happening around me? Am I embracing them? And lastly, have I really found hope in this world? Have I found purpose? Have I found peace? If not, I really commend you this book, because it will really lead you to the true source of peace, hope, and purpose. I'd like tonight to finish with just a short blessing over our lives as we continue to meditate on these things. For those that want, I'd like to invite you to bow your heads with me. Father, we thank you that you love us, and I pray that you'll bless each one of us, and may you especially give us hope, purpose, and meaning in life. Amen. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m., we're going to discuss about Patmos and the lost city in the sea, and we're going to tackle the curse of the forbidden prophecy. We are going to look at a prophecy that has been actually forbidden to people to read, and we are going to read it and discover what's that all about. But until then, I hope you'll have a wonderful, good night, and I look forward to see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for another amazing discovery. Ancient mysteries reveal the future. Have a good night.
Come on a journey to lost civilizations. See ancient artifacts and long-lost ancient scrolls.
The strange writing on this clay brick is known as cuneiform. Now, the script was used...
Take the journey of a lifetime and travel to ancient Babylon and the island of Patmos to discover how ancient mysteries reveal the future. A live seminar series Don't miss any program.